In Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather, Don Vito Corleone, the head of the most powerful of the 5 New York crime families, is approached by an international drug dealer and narcotics expert, Virgil Sollozzo, for a business proposition. Known as the Turk, Sollozzo has the backing of the rival Tattaglia family, and he goes to Don Corleone for money and protection from police and the courts. Don Corleone considers the offer, but politely declines, citing drugs being bad for business, and he wishes Sollozzo well in his endeavours. However, during the meeting, Sonny Corleone, Vito's eldest son, indicates an interest in the deal which does not go unnoticed by the Turk. A simple business proposition turned down, one might think, and the gesture accepted. Not so, however, as of course, shortly after in the film, Sollozzo puts out a hit on Don Corleone, the plan being to get him out of the way and then stronghold his son Sonny into a deal. Sollozzo is forced to improvise in his planning when the assassination attempt on Vito fails, and he's only injured instead of killed. Sonny is enraged at the turn of events, but the two sides are able to organise an arrangement in which Michael Corleone, the youngest of Vito's 3 sons, attends a meeting with Sollozzo and a police captain acting as his muscle. Ostensibly, the meeting is to arrange peace between all parties and organise a deal for Sollozzo's original proposition, but unbeknownst to the Turk, the Corleones have put everything in order to take him out, and at the meeting, Michael shoots both Sollozzo and the police captain. It's always interesting with The Godfather to ponder on what could have potentially happened had characters made alternative decisions. What if Sonny hadn't lost his temper and gone after Carlo in a rage after he beat his sister? What if Don Corleone didn't send Luca Brasi to the Turk to make him think that Luca wanted out of the family when he was known for his loyalty to Vito? What if Sonny hadn't spoken out of turn at the meeting with Sollozzo? And what if Don Corleone actually accepted Sollozzo's offer? Vito has always been against drugs, so we know that he would never have accepted the Turk's offer. On top of that, he didn't know him, didn't know his background. He knew he was associated with a rival family, and he was so worried about this fellow he sent his enforcer Luca Brasi to check him out. A man as careful and pragmatic as Don Corleone would never jump headfirst into such a deal, especially if, as he mentioned to Sollozzo, it would mean losing the trust of politicians and cops once they caught wind that Vito was in the dirty trade of drugs. The drugs question in the mob has always been an interesting one. On one hand, as Tom Hagen said, it is a prosperous trade, and someone is going to do it anyway, so why not us? On the other hand, drug charges are easy to make and carry long sentences, incentivizing mobsters to flip on their bosses for more lenient sentences. Plus, drugs tend to find their way into school playgrounds and the streets, and gangsters who get high on their own supply become reckless and dangerous. So Vito wouldn't have accepted the offer, but what if he did? Would the family see cash rolling in from the Turk's enterprise? Would there have been no assassination attempt on Vito, and therefore no reason for Michael to get involved in the family and ultimately become boss? Would Virgil and Vito slap their knees and merrily laugh the night away on Thanksgiving Day over drinks and turkey? Well, not quite. And in fact, there's actually many layers involved in this story. Sure, if Vito had accepted the deal, he would become richer, and he would make other families richer, but this proposition from the Turk was never truly about Sollozzo. He was just a pawn in a much larger chess game. As we know, Sollozzo has the backing of the Tattaglias who go to war with the Corleones after Sollozzo's shooting. In Vito's absence, the Corleones are run by Sonny, who proves himself to be a terrific wartime don, but his temper and rash thinking ends up costing him his life, leading an injured Vito to once again take the reins and call a truce with all other families. At the meeting with the heads of the rival families, it becomes clear to Vito that Don Barzini is actually the one behind the entire Sollozzo business. The 5-family war was never really about Sollozzo. It was about Barzini wanting to supplant Vito and his family as the most powerful gangster in New York, which is something Vito only realizes after the meeting. How exactly Vito worked this out is a video for another day, but the reality is that Barzini knew that Vito would turn down Sollozzo's offer, and thus he could carry out a hit against Vito. It's probably most likely, seeing as though Vito's stance on drugs was well known, that the offer from Sollozzo was designed to be one that Vito turned down. The murder of a boss would be justified as Vito being too old school, not with the times, selfish and power-hungry for not sharing his politicians, and ultimately the Corleones would weaken in strength and Barzini would climb the ladder. This plan is even in place after the meeting between the heads of the five families, as Barzini utilizes Vito's promise for peace at the meeting to launch turf wars and chase the Corleones out of New York. That's what he thinks anyway, as he hasn't accounted for the brilliance of Michael Corleone as Vito's successor. Barzini craved power for himself and wanted Vito out of the picture. We can assume that even if Vito accepted the deal, Barzini would have found some excuse to take Vito out. There really are two options Vito had with Sollozzo. The first being straight up refuse, which he did. Refusing to join a joint enterprise would be refusing to make a reasonable accommodation, which is grounds for a mob war. This means that Sollozzo can wage war against the Corleones without facing any repercussions from other families, and it actually forces the Tattaglias to participate, as they rely on Sollozzo's drug trade for their own fortune. It isn't just the Corleones being manipulated by Barzini from the shadows into a position where they are susceptible to be attacked. The Tattaglias find themselves exposed after being tricked into openly supporting Sollozzo's assassination attempt against Vito, so they had no choice but to fight. And if they were in on the hit from the beginning, well, it's a case of making your bed, now you have to sleep in it. If war broke out because Vito was being stubborn and refusing to permit others to make use of the politicians in his pocket, no one would take the Corleone side in a war, and Barzini could enter the picture as a supporter of Tattaglia's legitimate grievances. He's still in the background and not overly exposed, so he's still able to make a peace deal of his own if things go south. It's a perfect plan. If the war goes well, Barzini could position himself as the most powerful of the New York families, knocking the Corleones off their perch, and barring a few details here and there, this scenario is pretty much how it went down in the film, aside from, of course, Barzini ultimately losing to the wildcard Michael Corleone. The second scenario would involve Vito accepting the deal, which would, as Tom said, give the family enormous profits from the narcotics trade. As mentioned, Barzini could simply find another reason to have Vito bumped off, but being as sly as he was, he could use his share of the narcotics profits, which you imagine would be a larger percentage than that of the Corleones, to play a long game against Vito. After all, the Corleones would be required to provide protection for Sollozzo's drug runners, who would constantly get into trouble. By doing this, Vito would gradually expose his connections to his drug partners, leading the politicians and cops, as Vito predicted, to no longer align themselves with him. And even if they did, via threats or larger envelopes, it would become clear to the Barzinis who was in Vito's pocket by analysing which judges and police officials were letting Sollozzo's guys go, so they could then have Vito killed and simply approach the officials themselves, making their own deals with the officials, giving Barzini the one thing he needed that Vito had: legal protection. Vito's influence in the legal world is unmatched by other mobsters and is a key asset of his that makes him the most powerful of the families. If Vito had accepted the deal, eventually Vito would lose that legal power one way or another. The offer from Sollozzo was not a case of a drug dealer shopping around for protection. It was Barzini making, in chess terms, a gambit, i.e. a strategy intended to maneuver Vito into a position where he could be attacked and defeated. Obviously, as far as Sollozzo was concerned, this was a legitimate business proposition. But the reality was that he and Tattaglia was simply a pawn in Barzini's game. And the plan worked. Barzini ended up in a position where, in spite of the Turk's death, the narcotics trade was ongoing. Vito had given his protection, he was encroaching on Corleone territory, and all that was left after Vito died was to take out the kid who took over. But we all saw how that turned out. So what do you think would have happened if Don Corleone had accepted Sollozzo's offer? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.